Hi, I'm Declan Anderson. This is Crash Course U.S. History. Today we're going to be talking about slavery, specifically an enslaved person who would become a writer after being brought back into slavery multiple times. Charles Ball, the author of 50 Years in Chains. Ooh, Mr. Anderson, guess you could say he was held down by the old Charles Ball and chain. Know me from the past. That is a terrible pun that doesn't make sense. Slavery was hugely important to America. I mean, it led to the Civil War, and what lasted, at least in U.S. history, counts as a long-ass time, from 1619 to 1865. And yes, you may have visited some 1100-year-old house in Northern Ireland, but we are talking about the U.S. of A. While slavery may have been some time ago, we still struggle to overcome its lasting legacy. This is why it's very important for us to learn the first-hand accounts of Charles Ball. Charles Ball's life started as many other enslaved African Americans did. He was born in 1781 into a plantation in Calvert County, Maryland. When he was just 4 years old, he was sold to John Cox, a local slave owner, but despite the selling, he still lived near to his father and grandfather, a fortunate fate for a slave. After Charles's mother died, his father sank into a deep depression and ended up escaping slavery the night of his sale. This led Charles to go close to his grandfather, an African warrior who had arrived in Maryland about 1730. Now, if you don't know, African warriors are the most badass warriors in history, except for, wait for it, the Mongols. Charles' master, John Cox, would die when he was just 12, which meant that he had to work for his master's father. During this time, Charles Ball was able to find some comfort in a slave named Judah, who he married. After both his master and his master's children sold Charles to different people, he was subject to a 2-year legal battle. Slaves were a valuable asset back then, and many whites would either buy or rent them to do jobs for them, but most worked on plantations. But the worst moments of Charles Ball were yet to come, because after he changed hands a few more times in the same area, he was sold to a Georgia slave trader, Levin Balliard. Not only was he separated from his wife, a common experience for many enslaved relationships, but he also experienced horrible things. He went on to write in his book 50 Years in Chains. My new master, whose name I did not hear, took me that same day across Paxton, where I joined 51 other slaves whom he had bought in Maryland. 32 of these were men and 19 were women. The women were merely tied together with a rope about the size of a bed cord, which was tied like a halter around the neck of each. But the men, of whom I was the stoutest and strongest, were very differently comprisoned. A strong iron collar was fitted by means of a padlock around each of our necks. Now I could go on and on about the amount of times that Charles Ball changed hands, but I'm going to save you some time and go right to the interesting stuff. Let's go to the thought bubble. In August of 1807, Charles Ball made his first escape from slavery after being beaten severely by his master's brother. While he was caught and imprisoned in Virginia, this did not stop him, and he escaped from prison and made it back to Maryland to reunite with his wife and children. Talk about a dedicated man. He worked there for a few years as a free man before enlisting in the Navy in 1813 as a cook and a seaman. While he was offered to go to Trinidad with other contraband, he declined because, after all, he was a free man. In 1820, he invested his savings in a dairy farm and married again and fathered 4 children. His happiness was cut short as he was captured in June of 1830 and returned back to slavery by his former mistress's brother. He sued for his freedom, which didn't work, so he simply escaped again, only to be recaptured and sold. Just a week later, he escaped again and was able to catch a ride on a Philadelphia-bound ship. With just a small amount of supplies, he was able to emerge in Philadelphia and become a free man once again. He returned to Baltimore to see his family, a common theme of Charles's life, only to find out that they had been sold into slavery despite being legally free. Charles would never see them again. Afraid of meeting the same fate, he moved to Pennsylvania, where he would go on to live the rest of his life and write many accounts of his life. Oh, it's time for the open letter. An open letter to Charles Ball. Dear Charles Ball, when do you think the effects of slavery will be gone? Well, I don't know, because we're still dealing with them. Not to discredit you, in fact, you are probably one of the reasons that the effects aren't as bad nowadays. Your book, 50 Years and Change, really opened many white citizens' eyes of your time to the life of a slave and the mental and physical fatigue that you had to deal with. Seen as your book was one of the first enslaved narratives because many slaves couldn't read or write, you were a pioneer for many enslaved people. It also took much courage to write about the hard and illegal things that you did in a time where people could and would lash out at you for talking about such controversial topics. You single-handedly pushed forward the effort of civil rights, and many, including me, have been inspired by you. Best wishes, Declan Anderson. While Charles Ball may have pushed us forward closer to equal rights, the fight that he has fought is not over. Many people are still suffering from the effects of racial discrimination and economic issues. So if Charles Ball has taught us anything, it's to fight back against discrimination by writing about what we have experienced and educating ourselves. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.